Now they're going to try to keep her quiet. They're going to try to keep her in a basement. She'll go to rallies and she'll speak from a teleprompter, but she won't give any difficult interviews, if any at all. And I think if she goes off the teleprompter, they'll be very nervous about it because, Kamala Harris has shown herself to be a failure in public policy and an empty suit in almost every regard.
And we begin this week's roundtable, as we always do, with Salem News Channel's This Week on the Hill. Speaker Johnson joined in to talk about the state of the presidential race. Let's take a look.
This could be a tight election, but what President Trump is doing, what the Republican Party is doing by his choice of J.D. Vance, I really think that's an effort at outreach. It's an effort to speak to hardworking families and middle-class folks in the Rust Belt and around the country. J.D. comes from very humble beginnings, of course. His life story is now famous. I think that was a good move, and I think what Kamala Harris did was cement her legacy as a far-left San Francisco radical. That's what we have on the ticket. Now they're going to try to keep her quiet. They're going to try to keep her in a basement. She'll go to rallies and she'll speak from a teleprompter, but she won't give any difficult interviews, if any at all. And I think if she goes off the teleprompter, they'll be very nervous about it because, Kamala Harris has shown herself to be a failure in public policy and an empty suit in almost every regard.
Okay, well, it certainly does seem that the running mate choices are both trying to appeal to the same voters. And as you just heard from Speaker Johnson, it's that Rust Belt, small town, rural, manufacturing base kind of voter who has seen some tough times over the last several decades. Let's go straight to you, Elaine, because Job Creators Network, these are the people that you guys are trying to reach out to as well. Comparing Tim Walz and his approach from Minnesota versus J.D. Vance in Ohio, who do you think gets the better for those voters?
Well, I know that they have unveiled Tim Walz as some sort of savior and jobs guy and an amazing hero. But I read an article yesterday from the Wall Street Journal, and they took a look at his jobs plan in his state. And it's much like the federal level. Many of the jobs being created in Minnesota are actually taxpayer-funded government jobs. And that kind of papers over what's really happening at the state and federal level and in his state as well. I mean, you've got high income taxes in his state. You've got government red tape. You've got a war on energy. You've got a border problem. I mean, it's really just a microcosm of what's happening at the federal level. We had a jobs report last week of 114,000 jobs. 2/3 of those jobs were government jobs or quasi-government jobs, which are really funded by taxpayers. They're in the social services sector or healthcare. And the problem with those kinds of jobs is that they are not created from innovation and invention and lead to strong GDP and strong job growth and a strong economy. They're funded by the government. And so if we want to be a European style economy, we are on the way. And so is Minnesota, frankly. But if we want to return to prosperity, we have to get inflation under control. We have to increase our domestic energy, and we have to stop the reckless spending.
Well, and Akash, Minnesota hasn't voted for a Republican president since 1972, Nixon. They couldn't even find a way to vote for Ronald Reagan. So this wasn't a play for Minnesota. This was a play for across the border in in Wisconsin. And I know that AFP's been on the ground since the Scott Walker days when they tried to take over the Capitol there. AFP was fighting the fight for the people of Wisconsin. Do you think the people that you guys are in touch with on a regular basis in Wisconsin are going to respond to the Minnesota way of building big government?
I don't think so, Larry. I'm very, very skeptical. Here's what I'll say about Tim Walz. It's not that I frankly think he has any appeal to that working class Rust Belt Midwest base, who he does have some appeal to based on his electoral record in Minnesota, are suburban moderates, right? Minnesota has a lot of those. It's a relatively well-to-do state. Minneapolis has a lot of sort of upper and upper middle class suburbs where Tim Walz has done quite well. I think that's where Democrats see their opportunity to make gains, because exactly the point that you made, the kind of people that populate states like Wisconsin and Minnesota, when you get outside of a Madison or a Milwaukee or a Minneapolis, those people are simply not buying what Tim Walz is selling. He is a far left progressive, no matter how much he might be a football coach or might dress like he's from the Midwest or anything like that. They see past all of the superficial stuff, and they know that he holds all the same positions as the San Francisco progressives who run the Democratic Party.
Yeah, assistant coach. He stole valor on the football field too. It's that bad. Chris DeGaulle, you do our morning show on our Salem station there in Philadelphia. They could have had Josh Shapiro. As a Republican, I was nervous she was going to pick Josh Shapiro, but she didn't. What does that say to the voters in Pennsylvania who are still up for grabs now?
Too Jewish, to borrow a line from Blazing Saddles. No, but in all seriousness, that's exactly it. I think everybody knows it. And, some suggested, though, Politico reported this week on Josh Shapiro that he's actually the one that bailed. I had kind of a contrarian opinion about Josh Shapiro. When everybody insisted he would be the smartest pick and the most brilliant pick, the thing you should know about Josh Shapiro is he has been humming Hail to the Chief since he was in his mother's womb. I mean, that's all he's ever imagined he would do, is be president of the United States. And in my view, if you took a look at Kamala Harris, and while she's elevated him on the national stage, to join her ticket, what does that mean? You could potentially lose, or you win, and you're her number two for potentially a term or maybe two. I don't think if you see yourself as president one day, you want to be in that shadow. And you get back to Tim Walz. I thought it impossible that we're here, but I'm actually coming around to the conclusion some have been suggesting she may have been stuck with him. Like maybe everybody bailed on her and said, no thanks, you're damaged goods, sister. And Walz was bat crap crazy enough to go, I'll take the gig. And she was stuck with him. It almost makes no sense that you would have someone as textbook perfect on paper as Josh Shapiro available to you, and you went with that lunatic. That's the only way I can see it.
But it's definitely the furthest left politically we've ever seen of a presidential ticket. Usually there's one of them is a lefty, the other one sort of offsets, like Obama, Biden, and Biden-Harris for that matter. So how does this play with those suburban voters in Pennsylvania, Chris? Do you think that Pennsylvania is going to be a fight right up until the bitter end?
It will. We have a really high profile Senate race, of course, as well. That it's a seat that Republicans are hopeful they'll pick up in Bob Casey. Of course, John Fetterman has been a unique problem in Pennsylvania because he's been running around very anti-Josh Shapiro, oddly, very pro-Israel at the same time, though. And in fact, Fetterman has been such a problem that James Carville just said, we've got to do something to whip him in shape and get him back in line. So there are a lot of disparate interests. Energy is a huge subject in Pennsylvania, of course, and construction jobs are down, even though they're up in other places. Manufacturing, energy production, the things that have made Pennsylvania's economy are down. So, and of course, not to speak of crime, real crime problems, immigration. So I think if the safety issue and the inflation issue continue to be hammered, I think it's a game to the end. Yeah.
And yet, Elaine, to pick up on Speaker Johnson's last point there has still been no legitimate, real tough question to Kamala Harris about why she has now suddenly reversed her position on fracking, or whether she really has reversed her position on fracking. She has not taken one question from the media. How big a role does the media play in protecting her from any kind of scrutiny? Because it seems to me there's a lot of questions that need to be answered by this candidate.
Absolutely. I'd like just one answered from her, because so far there's been nothing. I think that in her pick of Governor Walz, the Democratic Party basically gave the middle finger to any kind of moderate voters at all. It is a very far left ticket. For sure. But I really think that Republicans up and down the ticket can win on the policy issues alone. President Trump isn't just talking about what he will do as president. He can talk about what he has done as president and how he can fix things. We've seen Kamala Harris. She doesn't even flip-flop herself. I mean, she's got her surrogates flip-flopping for her. That is the most pathetic form of flip-flopping I've actually ever seen. When you can't even stand by your own flip-flop,
Yeah.
So
exactly.
So I do. I think we can win on policy alone.
Well, I agree. But Akash, and I know a lot of people are saying that Donald Trump, and I think his press conference earlier this week was actually quite policy heavy. But if you go to her website right now, Kamala Harris still has no policies listed on it. They're not really leading with policy either. They're leading with this persona and this product, and the media seems to be protecting that strategy. How long will that last?
There's no question. I think this is an important distinction to make. It's not just that she needs to do an interview. She needs to do an actually substantive interview. It's not going to be enough to sit down with CNN and have them ask her how evil is Donald Trump, right? We need to actually ask her in an adversarial setting what she believes, what she stands for. Does she still believe all of these things that she ran for president on? Does she agree with President Biden's platform? Does she agree with the bills that she led and co-sponsored? Does Governor Walz agree with the bills that he was a part of as a member of Congress? Does he agree with all the things that he signed into law as governor? I mean, these things are very, very important policy questions. Meanwhile, President Trump and J.D. Vance have got to, as we've discussed many times, Larry, stay focused, keep their eye on the ball. The issues that Chris and Elaine were alluding to, right? J.D. Vance, to his credit, did that earlier this week on Fox Business. He came out and answered what was an open question, I think, and he endorsed the Trump tax cuts. He endorsed the corporate tax cut. He said, he acknowledged that they created jobs and grew the economy, grew wages. That is a concrete thing that we know the next administration wants to do with the Republican Congress, is build on tax reform. The American people know that. They appreciate that. We have no clue where Kamala Harris and Tim Walz stand on way, way too many issues, other than that we know that they are far left progressives down the line.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. We do know where they stand in terms of her being a San Francisco, California Democrat and all the policies she's embraced coming out of that state. And now with Tim Walz coming from Minnesota, the bluest of all blue states when it comes to presidential politics, I'm done with all the voters in America who tell me there's no difference, there's no real choice, both candidates are the same. No. I don't think we've ever had as stark a choice as we have this time. You can't hide behind that one anymore.